Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn have shared a life together since 1983, and neither one has ever put a ring on paper. No wedding, no marriage license, nothing filed at City Hall. For two people who built their careers as some of the most recognizable faces of an entire decade, that choice raises a real question. Why did some of the biggest heartthrobs of the 1980s race to the altar within months of meeting, while others built decades-long partnerships and skipped the paperwork completely? The answer says a lot about what actually keeps two famous people together once the cameras stop rolling. 15 leading men from that era found very different paths to lasting love, and some of those stories involve broken bones, a 6-page breakup letter, and a diagnosis that changed everything. Here's how it played out for each of them. Playing his on-screen girlfriend for one season, the chemistry off-camera outlasted the show itself. They married on July 16, 1988, and 38 years later, they're still together. And Pauline stepped into a role nobody signs up for at 31 years old. She became his caregiver, his partner, and eventually an active board member of the foundation he built to fight the disease. As of 2026, that foundation has funded over $3 billion in Parkinson's research. Reports occasionally suggest the couple live separate lives because of his illness. Those reports are wrong. Tracy remains his primary support, and by every account, the marriage is stronger now than when it started. So how did an actor manage to build a partnership that's solid, while the whole industry watched? Subscribe now, because the next few stories only get more surprising. Lowe met Sheryl Berkoff on a blind date in 1983, and by his own account, nothing happened right away. The two drifted apart, then crossed paths again 6 years later while working on the same film. That second meeting stuck. They married on July 22, 1991, and Lowe has credited getting sober the previous year in 1990, inspired by his commitment to her, as the real turning point. Berkoff, a jewelry designer, has kept a lower public profile than her husband, but the marriage has outlasted nearly every other Hollywood pairing from that decade. 35 years in, Lowe still posts birthday tributes calling her the love of his life. Ralph Macchio's story starts even earlier. He met Phyllis Fierro at a family party in 1976 when he was 15 years old and she was a family friend from the neighborhood. There was no immediate romance, just two teenagers who kept ending up at the same gatherings for years. That slow build turned into a wedding on April 5, 1987, right as Macchio's career as a young leading man was taking off. Fierro, a registered nurse, chose to raise their two children away from the spotlight almost entirely. Macchio has said the secret to a marriage now pushing 4 decades comes down to commitment and keeping 1 foot in and 1 foot out of Hollywood. Denzel Washington met Pauletta Pearson in 1977 on the set of a television film about the athlete Wilma Rudolph. He was an actor still building a name for himself, and she was already an established performer with a background on Broadway. They married on June 25, 1983, right before Washington's film career exploded. Divorce rumors surfaced more than once over the following decades, including one widely reported cheating claim his team firmly denied. None of it stuck. More than 40 years after the wedding, Pauletta has remained his most consistent presence at award ceremonies and premieres, and Washington regularly credits her with keeping him grounded through a career most people only dream about. Tom Selleck's approach to meeting his wife had nothing to do with Hollywood at all. In 1983, he repeatedly watched Jillie Mack perform in the London production of Cats, until she eventually made the first move and introduced herself. Mack was a dancer and actress building her own career in British theater, and the two kept in touch across an ocean for years before marrying on August 7, 1987. Selleck was famous by then for one of television's most recognizable mustaches, but he said repeatedly that his marriage works because he prioritizes balance and took a step back from Hollywood to nurture his family life. Nearly 4 decades later, that separation has held. Mack retired from acting decades ago, and the couple has largely avoided the tabloid churn that swallowed so many of Selleck's peers. Kevin Bacon and Kyra Sedgwick reconnected in 1987 while filming a television drama together, years after a brief first meeting in a New York deli. They married on September 4, 1988, just over a year after that first job. What makes their marriage stand out isn't a secret formula. It's the ordinary stuff. They've talked openly about arguing, about long stretches of distance during shoots, and about choosing every year to stay rather than assuming the relationship runs on autopilot. 38 years later, Bacon has called the marriage the best thing that ever happened to him, in more than one interview. Jeff Bridges met Susan Geston in 1974 on a film set in Montana, where she was working as a local waitress. He asked her out. She said no. At the time, Geston had 2 black eyes and a broken nose from a car accident just days earlier, and she wasn't interested in dating an actor who'd only just noticed her. The rejection didn't end things. They danced together at the wrap party shortly after meeting, and something clicked that hadn't clicked before. They married on June the 5th, 1977, in Malibu. 49 years later, Bridges still frequently recalls how her vivid beauty, despite those black eyes and broken nose, riveted him from the very first moment he saw her. Harrison Ford's second marriage looked nothing like his first. He met Calista Flockhart at an awards ceremony in January 2002, when he was 59 and she was 37. A 22-year gap tabloids couldn't stop mentioning. Unlike a couple later in this list who never bothered with a wedding at all, Ford and Flockhart dated for 8 years and still walked down the aisle, marrying in June 2010. Ford has since joked about a simple rule that keeps the marriage steady, telling reporters that his secret is simply, "Don't talk. Nod your head." Flockhart, who adopted a son before the two even met, brought a ready-made family into the relationship, and Ford has said becoming a father again in his 60s changed him more than any role ever did. If any of these stories are catching you off guard, hitting like actually helps more people come across this video. Now back to the couple who started this whole story. Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn first met on a movie set in 1967, when Russell was still a teenager and Hawn was just starting out in Hollywood. Nothing happened then. They reconnected in 1983, and this time it worked immediately. What never happened, even after all these years, was a wedding. Russell has explained the choice as a kind of pact between them, an agreement that marriage wasn't going to be the thing that decided whether they stayed together. Hawn has said much the same in interviews, insisting the relationship survives specifically because neither of them feels legally required to stay. Reports about a secret marriage surface every few years. Both have denied it, every single time. Whatever the tabloids print, they keep proving that a certificate was never the point that mattered to them. Richard Gere didn't find lasting love until much later in life. He reconnected with Alejandra Silva in 2014, when he was 64 and she was 31, a 33-year age gap even wider than Ford's. They married in April 2018, and Gere has said his priorities had simply shifted by that point in his life. In November 2024, the couple made a bigger move than anyone expected, relocating from the United States to Madrid to work full-time on charity projects focused on ending homelessness. Gere, once known mainly for a string of leading roles in the 80s, now spends most interviews discussing housing policy instead of his filmography. Silva has said the move wasn't a retreat from fame, it was a decision about what they actually wanted their life to look like. Pierce Brosnan met Keely Shaye Smith in Mexico in 1994 and married her on August 4, 2001, after 7 years together. Brosnan has been fiercely protective of his wife whenever tabloids target her appearance, publicly praising her intelligence, her work as a journalist, and her environmental activism far more often than her looks. Throughout their marriage, Brosnan has consistently defended and praised his wife against online commentary and tabloid rumors. More than 3 decades after they met, Brosnan still calls her his north, south, east, and west in nearly every tribute he gives, and he clearly means it every time. Sylvester Stallone and Jennifer Flavin met in 1988, and their relationship almost didn't survive its own decade. In 1994, Stallone ended things by sending Flavin a 6-page letter through a courier service, a breakup delivered without a single phone call. They reconciled a year later and married on May 17, 1997. The marriage held for 25 years, until Stallone filed for divorce in 2022, and headlines everywhere declared the relationship over for good. It wasn't. The couple called off the filing after just 35 days, and they remain married today. Stallone has said the brief split caused a reawakening, forcing him to realize that his family mattered more to him than anything else, including his career. Don Johnson's marriage to Kelly came after 4 previous marriages and a career built on playing a stylish television detective throughout the 1980s. The two met in the mid-1990s and married on April 29, 1999. Johnson has said the difference this time came down to 3 things: patience, timing, and simply being older when they met. Flagger, a former teacher, has stayed almost entirely out of the public eye for the past 25 years, which Johnson credits as one reason the marriage has lasted this long. His daughter from his marriage to Melanie Griffith, Dakota Johnson, has become one of the most recognizable faces in entertainment today, but Don and Kelley have kept their own home life remarkably private by comparison. Bruce Willis and Emma Hemming married on March 21, 2009, and for over a decade, the marriage looked like a fairly typical Hollywood success story. Then Willis's behavior started changing, and Hemming didn't understand why. She has since admitted that before any diagnosis existed, she seriously considered divorce. Because they were no longer aligning on things, he was failing to recall conversations, and nothing about his shifts in behavior made sense to her at the time. In 2022, doctors diagnosed him with aphasia, which was later identified in 2023 as frontotemporal dementia, a diagnosis that reframed everything that came before it. Hemming became his primary caregiver, and in September 2025, she published a book about that experience, revealing that the couple now lives in separate homes because a single-story layout works better for his care. She has said clearly that this isn't a marriage ending. It's a marriage adapting to something neither of them saw coming. Matthew Broderick and Sarah Jessica Parker were introduced by her brothers in November 1991, and the two dated quietly for years before marrying on May 19, 1997. The wedding itself became one of the more talked-about secrets in Hollywood. Parker invited around 100 guests to what she told them was a regular party, and none of them realized it was a wedding until the ceremony began. She also admitted, years later, that she bought her dress off the rack at a store she liked, in black, because she felt too embarrassed to spend real time searching for something more traditional. She's called it a regret ever since. 29 years later, the marriage remains one of the most stable in an industry that rarely rewards stability. 15 careers, 15 very different roads to love, and somehow most of them lasted longer than anyone expected. If any of these stories stuck with you, like and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this era worth uncovering.